everybody doing this morning? We're kind of straggling in. Are there any announcements that need to be made? Anybody knows of before we begin? Be turning to Psalm 127. Psalm 127. No announcements? Nothing major? I do have one. Pat's over at Crown Point now, and they have a pumpkin painting contest, and I don't know if y'all realize it, but Pat's quite an artist. And she painted a pumpkin, and whoever wins, it's determined by votes. And anybody can go vote. So if you get a chance to go by Crown Point between now and what's today, the 19th? Got a few days left to vote for Pat's pumpkin. Oh, I put that up, Pat's pumpkin. Yeah, she'll get a $25 prize if you do that. So. And bragging rights. What? And bragging rights. She's quite a good artist. We've got a painting of hers up in our living room, or dining room. We could dining room. They all kind of run together. So go vote. You'd hate to be the cause of an inferior pumpkin painting winning the prize. No other announcements. Psalm 127, my favorite psalm. Probably my favorite passage in the Bible. Having 3 little boys growing up. I started to have this part of this put on a t-shirt because I went to archery tournaments all the time. Psalm 127, unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It is in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for he gives to his beloved sleep. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate. Will you bow with me? Heavenly Father, thank you for our opportunity to be here, to have fellowship together and study together. We thank you for this day that we set aside to honor you, to worship you, to give you the glory from our lives. We pray that we'll do that all the time. But Father, help us this morning to put aside all the cares that we have, the problems that we have in our busy lives, and concentrate on you. Help us to remember that you created us, you understand us better than we understand ourselves, you love us. Help us to remember the sacrifices that you've made for us. Father, guide us in our study and our worship service. Guide us in our lives. Help us to be loving and kind and to show your love by our actions, by our words to those around us. Guide us always. Help us to remember that we belong to you. In Christ's name we pray. Okay, if you're new here, if you've not been, you haven't been here for visiting or something, haven't been here for a while. We're going through we went through pretty much the entire plan of salvation. Not every scripture in the Bible, but we can get over it here. But now we're looking at what comes after that. The point is not, I think sometimes we might get the impression because we concentrate on this plan of salvation thing. Once you complete that, you're done. But that's the beginning, and the point is to live the rest of our lives for God and particularly fulfill the Great Commission. That's the job of a disciple, is to make more disciples. The last thing Jesus charged us with before he went back. So we're going through some of the things that, and certainly not all, if you go through the whole Bible is how to be there's especially the New Testament, how to be a Christian, how to live your life for God once we obey the gospel. We're looking at some highlights, and particularly some problem areas that at the moment we're in 1 Corinthians. We're going to start in 1 Corinthians 7. We're going to back up here to 1 Corinthians 6. We're going to start 1 Corinthians 7 this morning. And we have these two letters that are longer than average that Paul wrote to the church in Corinth dealing with things. And if you're familiar with 1 and 2 Corinthians at all, exactly, if we had all of these, all the letters we know of that Paul wrote to the church in Corinth, then this would be 2 and 4 Corinthians. But that tells us something in itself. We don't have the first letter, or evidently the third letter that Paul wrote to the church in Corinth. He wrote to them a lot. And of course, Paul spent on Wednesday evening, we're going through, did I do something wrong? This thing died on me again. You don't hear me all right, right? No? You can't hear me.
What you said? Yeah, we hear.
You know, the funny thing, everybody knows I'm deaf, but a large part of that is tinnitus. Partly it's I'm deaf, and partly I have tinnitus, which is this, it's like, if anybody got tinnitus, it's like having a conversation and there's somebody standing beside you, or between you and the person you're talking to going, and you got to hear everything through that. So, that's part of my problem. And I blame Larry for it, although it's not his fault. I got to blame somebody.
I always heard it was a gift for a preacher to be hard of hearing, that way you can just talk all the time.
Yeah,
Listen.
well, yeah, there you go. There you go. That's,
I hear you well.
that's part of it. But we've got these letters Paul wrote to the church in Corinth, and they're letters we can learn from, because, you know, we look at some of the letters that he wrote to other churches, and he doesn't have hardly any complaints. But Corinth has got a lot of problems. And when you look around at our society today, our church in general, not necessarily the congregation here in Sheridan, but the church in general is dealing with a lot of issues these days. We're in a place where the world, in the world, people who are trying to worship God are in the minority to begin with, just like the church was in Corinth. They were surrounded by all these people who were pagan worshipers, who some of them, especially at the beginning, at the time when Paul showed up on his missionary journeys, a lot of those people probably didn't really have a concept of a Jehovah God, a one creator God who was in charge of everything. And they believed in gods. They typically believed in multiple gods. They were polytheological, whatever you call it. And their concept was gods are superior forms of humans. They're not omniscient. They're not everywhere. They're not all-seeing. They're all-knowing. They're not all-powerful. They can be tricked. They can be hidden from. They can be manipulated. They can be coerced. And that was the idea of the sacrifices and the this and that they would do. And so if you think of your God that way, it's difficult to imagine one God being in charge of everything. It's difficult to get our human minds around the concept of one God being in charge of everything, being capable of all the creation and keeping up with everything. It would be more logical to these folks. It's got to be a bunch of them, because you need a committee to run a world like this. So Paul's trying to deal with these people, help them with their problems, their issues, and being the church hadn't been going all that long at that point. There's always issues when we try to change our lives. These people, especially the ones coming from paganism to Christianity, dealing with the issues that you normally have when you change your life completely. I'm not supposed to go to those places anymore, but that's where all my friends are. I'm not supposed to eat those kind of things. I'm not supposed to attend these kind of parties, but that's what I've always done. And so they had issues. They had issues about how am I supposed to live for God when basically they've been kind of living for themselves with an effort to not irritate these, what they call gods before then. Chapter 7, we looked at 6 a little bit last week, but I decided we probably should have looked at 7 first. Chapter 7, 1 Corinthians first, because there's a little bit, there's a question here that I think seems to me like Paul kind of answered it in chapter 6, and it's brought up in chapter 7. Maybe we have it mixed up, but I kind of doubt it. At the beginning of chapter 7, Paul's talking about, this is mainly about marriage, this chapter, and actually part of the previous one too. A lot of our issues today spring up from marital issues, don't they? And Jesus talked about marriage, divorce, things like that in Sermon on the Mount and some of his other teachings. He was pressed about it. The Jews had particular ideas about things. Jesus gave his teaching on it. It didn't go away. The problem didn't go away. Surprisingly, 2,000 years later, the problem still hadn't gone away. It's one of the main issues that plague us. And the church is not immune. People who are not religious at all, don't even believe in God necessarily, get married and divorced. We do too. Christians did the same thing. Things go sour. And maybe not quite as high a rate as in the world, but it happens. And everybody here knows 2 or 3 people at least who have been divorced. One of my best friends went through a divorce, and I kind of, closest guy to me that's ever gone through, the closest person in my life that's ever gone through that, and I tried to be there for him and that's an ugly thing. It's a painful thing, and it wasn't God's plan to begin with. We have that all the way through, and in Corinth, it must have been quite an issue. One of the issues in the first part of we're going to skip the first part of chapter 7. We're going to start in verse 6. The first part is about sexual immorality. We talked about that a little bit last week. We may talk about it a little bit more. It was a big issue, especially in a place like Corinth, a pretty good sized city, a port city with all kinds of people coming and going from all over the world, with all kinds of different religions, and they had all these shrines to all these different gods, and a lot of their pagan worship involved sexual activity. And so these people coming from that world, coming to Christianity, it was probably a shock to them. I'm going to have to change the way I do everything, even down to how I worship has to be changed. We got that first part. Then in verse 6, he goes into an issue that must have come up quite a bit because he deals with it here, trying to explain, here's how you do this. 1 Corinthians 7, beginning verse 6, now as a concession, not a command, I say this, I wish that all were as I myself am, but each has his own gift from God, one of one kind and one of another. To the unmarried and the widows, I backed up a little bit, I was looking at something. To the unmarried and the widows, I say that it is good for them to remain single as I am, but if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry, for it's better to marry than to burn with passion. To the married, I give this charge, not I, but the Lord. The wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. And the husband should not divorce his wife. So far, so good? To the rest, I say, I, not the Lord, that if any brother has a wife who is an unbeliever and she consents to live with him, he should not divorce her. If any woman has a husband who is an unbeliever and he consents to live with her, she should not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is made holy because of his wife, and the unbelieving wife is made holy because of her husband. Otherwise your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. But if the unbelieving partner separates, let it be so. In such cases, the brother or sister is not enslaved. God has called you to peace. For how do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? Now, this probably should have come in about week 3 or 4 of a study on marriage, divorce, and remarriage. But Paul's making some, at the beginning there, he's making some points about if you're in this situation, if you're in that situation. And in a minute I'll ask you, how does what he says there, how does what he says in can't remember which verse 15, how does that apply to Jesus' teaching on this? But I want to back up just a second first, because clear up something that the church in Corinth probably had an issue with. He says here out loud, I want to know why Paul would put this down, why Paul would send them this. Verse 12, if any brother has a wife who is an unbeliever and she consents to live with him, he should not divorce her. If any woman has a husband who's an unbeliever and he consents to live with her, she should not divorce him. Why did he say that? Any ideas? What must have been going on in Corinth?
Lots of leaving your wife or husband.
It's
A lot of,
for what reason?
well, for any reason.
If you're a believer and your spouse is an unbeliever, don't leave them. Don't divorce them. That's what he's saying. So what must have been going on? Connect these dots. This church in Corinth, these people are coming from this pagan world, most of them. Some of them may have been from a Jewish background. Most of them probably pagan. And they hear the gospel and they respond. And then they go home and tell their husband or their wife, hey, guess what I did today? Well, I'm not doing that. They didn't hear the same message you did. Yeah, we talk about this. I don't know which side of the brain y'all think with. I'm left brain. Some of you are left brain. Some of you are right brain. I'm not saying you're wrong, but left brain is kind of the way to go. From my standpoint. But if depending on which side of your brain you are, is going to determine how you look at things. Left brain people are more fact, logic oriented. Right brain people are more creative and emotionally motivated. And so in a marriage, typically you're not going to have two people who are exactly the same. And so you look at things from different angles. And you see this same kind of thing happening today. If a husband and wife who've been married for a while and they hear the gospel, sometimes they'll respond entirely differently to it. And I think must have been what's going on in Corinth. The husband or the wife hears the message and responds to it and maybe obeys the gospel and then go home and tell, guess what? We're not going to that bacchanal on Friday night at the Poseidon temple. I can't do that anymore. That's going to cause some conflict, right? I think that's what's happening here. That's the exactly kind of conflict that Jesus was talking about when he said, I didn't come to bring peace but a sword, to pit one against another, mother against daughter and daughter against mother and things like that. The gospel causes conflict because when you have one person in the family who wants to obey God and one who doesn't, they're going to have a hard time. So these people are coming to Christ, and then their spouse is kicking up a fuss. What are they probably doing in Corinth at that point? They're splitting up. They're getting divorced there because it's a lot easier that way. You go back, you read Hebrews. Hebrews is written to Jewish people who have become Christians and are experiencing such a hard time at it that they're thinking the only way for me to get by in this world is to go back to Judaism. Because everybody that was friends hates me. Everybody that I was friends with hates me. My own family doesn't even want me coming around this Thanksgiving. I don't know if they had Thanksgiving back then, but we've got a social circle here that has kicked us completely out. Well, what if that social circle is shrunk to just you and your spouse, and your spouse is not happy with you for what you've done? This is the way to go. This is the creator of the universe that I'm worshiping now. Why would you not want to be involved with that? Well, maybe they're not to that point. So Paul makes a point here to answer this. This is a huge issue. And it's not just an issue when one spouse obeys the gospel and one is not interested. Even if both are in the church. You know, when my dad did a lot of, he performed no telling how many marriages. And luckily I didn't have to go to all of them. But when I was little, I had to go to marriage all the time. And before Dad would marry somebody, a couple, he would require sitting down with them and doing some counseling, asking some questions, see where we are. As a matter of fact, I got a message from a woman. A thing popped up on Facebook a while back. This woman named Vicky Bodie married a fellow named Barker. And she wrote this thing about when they got married, and she was like 17 and he was 18, and they had a couple that were boyfriend and girlfriend that were their friends that went with them, and they went to Jamie Hempel's house in Mason on a Saturday afternoon, and he married them in their living room. I was there for that one. She'd been married at the point, she put this up the other day, she'd been married for almost 60 years. Well, it's been a couple of years ago now, about 55 years. And I remember that one, it was in July. And I wanted to throw rice when they left. In the kitchen, couldn't find any rice, but I found some of those little marshmallows you put in hot chocolate. So we threw marshmallows, my brother and I threw marshmallows out of it. And they got on the car and melted down in there where the marshmallows are not supposed to go, in front of the windshield, down where the windshield wipers. They didn't care, they just got married. And that couple's still married. They've been married for right at 60 years now. My dad did that for a long time, and he said, I want to sit down with you and talk to you about it so you'll understand what you're getting into. You'll understand what's going on. You understand what you're having to give up. Because when you take two people from two different environments and put them together, there's going to be conflict. And if they are from the same culture, from approximately the same financial status, from approximately the same familial situation, meaning they say they both their parents are still living together at home, head of the household, same political attitudes, same religious attitudes, then everything's the same, there's still going to be conflict. But when you start changing those things, say they're from a different race, nothing wrong with that. God doesn't have a problem with that. White people marrying black people or Asian people marrying, doesn't matter. It is going to cause conflict. You have to work that out. You're going to have to deal with it. There's nothing wrong with it spiritually. If they're different from different financial backgrounds, if they're from different religions, especially different political affiliations, that's going to cause conflict in the home, and you're going to have to deal with that ahead of time. We used to have young couples classes in Mason. In the time I got married, most of my friends had just got married. We had a bunch of young couples about the same time, so we had classes. What I found out was that surprisingly, my wife and I weren't the first ones in the world to go through the problems that we were going through. I thought we were, you know. I thought nobody's ever had this problem before. No, nobody's ever had a spouse that didn't put the lid back on the toothpaste tube before. Well, those are trivial. Can cause problems, That's nothing compared to what these people in Corinth were going through, right? And it was causing divorces. And Paul's saying, you don't have to divorce somebody if they're willing to stay with you. That last part of that. If they're willing to stay with you, don't divorce them just because they haven't accepted Christ yet. He says something down here that's kind of confusing also in verse 14. For the unbelieving husband is made holy because of his wife, and the unbelieving wife is made holy because of her husband. What does that mean? That's kind of a puzzler too. He doesn't mean they're saved because of an association with somebody else that's saved. What he means there is the unbelieving spouse is much more likely to end up believing in the long run if the Christian spouse is patient and loving and understanding and forgiving the way we're supposed to be. You know, sometimes I wonder, we have conflicts with people who are closest to us. We're polite and deferential and courteous to people who are perfect strangers, and we go home and something isn't just right, we end up having a conflict there too often. It's the people who are closest to us, and it seems to be because we really want them to be just like us. We really want them to look at things just like us, and when they don't, it causes issues. Well, they're having that there, but Paul's saying if you'll stay together, if you will be the kind of spouse you're supposed to be, then it's possible. He gets down to the end, the last verse 16 in that section kind of explains that. How do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband, or how do you know, husband, whether you'll save your wife? But that's not the confusing, that's pretty obvious, but that's not the confusing part. The confusing part comes in verse 15, I believe. If the unbelieving partner separates, let it be so. In such cases, the brother or sister is not enslaved. God has called you to peace. Not enslaved. What does that mean, not enslaved? Turn over to Matthew chapter 5 right quick. Hold your finger there, we're coming back. Turn to Matthew chapter 5. And this is not the only place that this pops up, the only place that Jesus talks about it, but it's one of the places. Matthew 5, 31. It was also said, he's going through things, it was said. You've heard that it was said you shall not murder. You've heard that it was said you shall not commit adultery. You've heard that it was said this and that. Partly that's because most of the Bible was read to them from scrolls in the synagogues. A lot of people couldn't read, and if they could read, they didn't have a copy of the Bible at home, necessarily. Usually they wouldn't. But partly it was because this is the way that they did it in the synagogue for the purpose of rote memory. They would read passages over and over. You've heard that it was said this and that and the other. In verse 31, you've heard that it was said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. All right? So, in light of what Jesus just said, what's the options for a scriptural divorce? 100% of the options. What's
Unchaste.
Unfaithfulness, yeah. That's it. That's the only reason that Jesus gives. And there's not another reason someplace else, except, and that's pretty clear. That's where we want to preach. But except, there's something that Paul says here that seems kind of off, doesn't it? In verse 15 there. You are not enslaved. What does he mean by that? Doesn't mean anything about that. Does it change anything at all? I mean, I'll wait. Somebody come up with an answer.
It doesn't change anything from what was said in Matthew.
It-
It doesn't change anything.
Then
But it gives the one and only reason.
the one and only reason that Jesus gave was unfaithfulness of the spouse. Then you can divorce the spouse. It doesn't say you have to, but you could, and have a scriptural divorce, right?
But it also adds you're no longer an obligation.
No longer.
Well, you're not any longer unobligated
Yeah.
to that earlier marriage if it's for
Yeah.
that reason.
Did anybody have an issue with that, with what Jesus said there? I mean, if you want to argue with Jesus, I'd like to hear it. I'd like to hear what that perspective is. So there's one reason that a scriptural divorce can happen is unfaithfulness of the spouse, and you can divorce that spouse if you choose to. I've known plenty of people who went through that and chose to stay and try to make it work. But that's an option. So then when we get over here to what Paul's telling the church in Corinth, he says, and we've got a particular situation here where you have a Christian spouse and a non-Christian spouse in the same house. So that could be part of the issue. And evidently, sometimes it was, because he's dealing with that situation. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been something worth bringing up. But he says, if the unbelieving partner separates, then he's giving advice to the Christian partner. He's not giving advice to the one that left, the unbeliever. He's giving advice to the Christian partner. If your unbelieving partner leaves you, he's saying, let him leave. Let it be so. In such cases, the brother or sister, meaning the Christian side of this marriage that's one Christian and one non-Christian, the Christian one, brother or sister, is not enslaved. Is not enslaved to what?
To their obligation of marriage.
So what does that mean in the long run?
It means that, it doesn't say anything about remarriage. All it says is that Christian person can live without the constraints of the marriage contract that they have.
Y'all agree with that? That's not the only way that people look at that, but that's one of them, right? Not enslaved. Which means you're out of the marriage, right? Which defines marriage as what?
So,
Slavery. You're not enslaved anymore. You were enslaved, and a lot of people look at it that way. If that's not what he's talking about, what would the enslaved be? Either he's describing marriage itself, the institution of marriage, as slavery. Your spouse leaves, you don't have to worry about getting back. You're not enslaved. What else could it be? What's another option there? This is not a pleasant thing to talk about, to study. It's never been. One of the most difficult things that we have. One of the things that causes more problems in the church than anything else, because people can't get along at home. And the way people act, the way couples act to one another in public is often nowhere near the way they act behind closed doors. I've known people who are real friendly and at home they couldn't get along at all. I got one friend that he and his wife fought in public all the time. I think at home it was even worse. That's the one that ended up getting divorced. But this is a problem for the church. And if we have problems, we need to deal with them. And this is kind of a question here, because this is one of the main things that comes up. And Paul's not done with this. We're gonna have to look at it some more. But he's dealing with a particular situation here with a Christian spouse and a non-Christian spouse. And what Beth said is one possibility for that not being an enslaved thing. The other possibility that's been brought up to apply to this is not only are you not enslaved to that marriage, but you're free to marry somebody else. It's a scriptural marriage if the spouse left. That's one way people look at it. Yeah. Is that the right way? It doesn't sound like it to me. One of the main things I try not to do is say, this is set in stone, unless I'm pretty sure it's set in stone. But I don't think that's what it means there. I really don't. Do you have something to do? All right.
That contradicts what we've already read, the thing that you'd be available to marry again contradicts what we've already read.
It would. You know,
I don't think we have two laws here.
I don't think so either. Yes, sir.
This brings to mind, all things are lawful, but not all things are expedient.
Yeah, there you go. There's more than one way to look at stuff, but what you have there is typically people looking for a loophole. And that happens a lot. People are constantly looking for a way to, how close to the edge can I get? How can I get away with this? Is there any way that there's, and that's why Dad used to counsel with people before he would marry them. Do you understand what this means? Do you understand what kind of commitment you're making? Because once you make that commitment, there's very few options open to you in the future if this happens, if that happens, if the other. You need to understand going in what that means to your life. Lifelong commitment. I think he sums things up. You know, there's a lot of times you can go to a chapter especially, or a book in general, and say, okay, this sums up what the message is here. Well, verse 17, I think sums up the message of what Paul's talking about in this situation. Let each person lead the life that the Lord has assigned to him and to which God has called him. What life has the Lord assigned to you? What life has God called you to? And we look at that. It's hard for us to sit here in Sheridan, Arkansas, and look at things from the perspective of a Corinthian pagan who has come into the church and is experiencing all this turmoil from their family, from their friends, from their business associates, from everybody in their life that they deal with. Now, I'm committed to this being a Christian, but everything's piling in on me.
But even today, that statement cuts out a lot of options.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does. You know, there's a lot of scriptures that cut out a lot of options. That applies to a lot of things. Now let's go back. He dealt with that here. Now let's go back to chapter 6. We looked at the beginning of this issue back in chapter 6, where starting in verse 12, he talks about a couple of things that he's trying to help the Corinthians understand how to live for God, right? How to be faithful Christians in a pagan world, which is exactly where we are. And he says, all things are lawful. Sir, we were talking about a while ago. We looked at this last week. All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything. Food is meant for the stomach and the stomach for food, and God will destroy both one and the other. The body is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the boy, he took a left turn there without a signal. We're talking about food, and then all of a sudden sexual immorality. It's the same kind of thing. He's talking about the same kind of issues in our lives. Yes, sir?
It's all human desire.
Yeah, all fueled by desire. The body is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. God raised the Lord and will also raise us up by his power. And he goes on about the body as this temple. Things have changed. It's not like it was during the law of Moses, where God had a temple in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah. That was his throne room, but that's not a holy place anymore. He lives in us now. This is a different kind of situation. We're the temple now. And so if our body is going to be the temple, it's going to have to be treated differently than what the world typically treats the body. You're going to have to learn to live with that. If you're willing to make this commitment, that's where it's going. You know, whenever I was growing up, people dressed as nice as that. They got the absolute best clothes to go to church on Sunday morning. And it's hard for me being old school not to kind of miss that. I don't miss the neckties, but I miss it. But you know, sometimes I think it's better for us that people don't do that now, because when I look back at it, it can be associated with putting on affectations in front of God. If I show up at church on Sunday morning, a lot of people do now, wearing the same kind of clothes that we wear to work every day or during the week. I haven't put a facade on to try to present myself as something different to God than what I am all the time. This is what I am. I'm going to be this way out there, and I'm going to be this way here. I'm going to talk the same way in the world as I talk in church on Sunday morning. I'm going to tell the same kind of jokes. If I tell a joke to my friends before church starts, I'm not going to have to clean up something I told somewhere else in order to tell it here. I'm going to be the same here as I am everywhere else. Maybe the clothes thing helps with that a little bit. I don't know. I think we're being a little bit unreasonable when we expect people to dress a certain way, as long as it's modest. Anyway, so I'm not above being hypocritical about that. I've done that too many times, but I try not to.
When people used to dress up like that to go to church, it made it difficult for some people who didn't have those types of clothing. They didn't feel like they fit in.
Yeah, that's a possibility too. And alienating people is not what we're supposed to be about. So maybe that's a good thing for that reason. We're going to pick up there next time. If you'll bow with me, we'll close with prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for loving us so much that you sent your Son to die for us. Father, help us to remember that love, remember that sacrifice. Help us to concentrate on worshiping you, giving you the glory during our coming worship service, but also throughout our lives every day.